Pastor Weston Walker at Grace and Mercy Lutheran Church in Hermiston, Oregon, continuing our discussion on Luther's Small Catechism. We're still in the first section of the Catechism, the Ten Commandments. Today we'll look at the first four commandments. And I believe the intrigue of Luther's work in dealing with the Ten Commandments here is to show the broad application of these commands. In Luther's view, these are not just simple, one sentence, straightforward, that's what you go and do. There's much more to it than that. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods. We might look at that and say, well, we have no other gods. We're not polytheistic. This really isn't that relevant to us. But here's the beauty in Luther's response. When he asks in the form of the Catechism, what is this or what does this mean? He says, we are to fear, love, and trust God above all things. We are to fear, love, and trust God above all things. It's interesting, as we look at all 10 of these commandments, Luther's responses to them, he begins the same way. We are to fear and love God. We are to fear, love, and trust God above all things. To have no other gods is not simply the absence of other gods in our lives, but it's that we do not put other things above God. And so easy it is for us to put things above God. And that is the challenge of this first commandment. The second commandment, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. You may remember an earlier translation of that, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Luther answers, what is this or what does this mean? We are to fear and love God so that we do not curse, swear, practice magic, lie, or deceive using God's name, but instead use that very name in every time of need to call on, pray to, praise, and give thanks to God. This wrongful use of the Lord's name, I think at the heart of it is using God's name in deceptive ways. Using God's name to ensure to someone that we're telling the truth when we're not telling the truth. That's misusing God's name. But I like how Luther then turns from how not to use God's name, but to remind us the many good ways that we should use God's name. The third commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And this is the one that on the surface causes the most consternation for Christians. Is this something relevant for Christians? And I have trouble with Luther's answer here in the Small Catechism. What is this or what does this mean? He says, we are to fear and love God so that we do not despise preaching or God's word, but instead keep that word holy and gladly hear and learn it. I think that misses the point of the Ten Commandments in their original context in the Old Testament. The Sabbath day in the Old Testament is primarily a day for rest. And the only thing that Luther here mentions is not despising the preaching or God's word. And so I decided to dig a little further and where in the world was Luther on this issue. And if you ever have a question about something in the Small Catechism, a good place to look is the Large Catechism, because that's the more comprehensive treatment of this same subject. And so I was intrigued to find this in the Large Catechism. This commandment, the third commandment of the Sabbath day, therefore, according to its gross sense, as in its overall sense, does not concern us Christians, for it is altogether an external matter, like other ordinances of the Old Testament, which were attached to particular customs, persons, times, and places, and now have been made free through Christ. So Luther had read clearly, that's no surprise, he was a great scholar. But in trying to make this simple, in most simple terms, for teaching children about the Christian faith, he focuses on our opportunity and need to worship God together and hear God's word proclaimed. And Christians have done that since the very beginning on Sunday, on the first day, on the Lord's Day, because that's the resurrection day. I have a funny story from my past about how different Christians have interpreted Sabbath rules. When I was a young minister, fairly fresh out of seminary, I grew up in a church that de-emphasized the Ten Commandments and Old Testament law, focused on that we are now under the law of Christ. And so there was never really much concern about following Sabbath rest rules. And one week I got a scathing letter from the Reformed Church down the street, scolding us for our poor Christian witness because one of our members cut the church lawn on a Sunday afternoon. And this Christian saw that, and it so offended them that they saw that we were not giving good Christian witness because we were not respecting the rest laws of the Sabbath day. Well, the fourth commandment, wrapping up here, honor your father and mother. And again, Luther, at his best here, makes this much more broad in his application. What is this, or what does it mean? We are to fear and love God so that we neither despise nor anger our parents and others in authority, but instead honor, serve, obey, love, and respect them. Luther's view of the Ten Commandments is that these are not simple things that we can accomplish. These are huge things. This is what God desires for his people. And we can work and try our best for our whole life, and we can never succeed at these. We are to fear and love God so that we neither despise nor anger our parents or others in authority. That's rather broad. Tomorrow we'll pick up with the rest of the commandments.